Alright, so once we've started an assembly, the first thing we're going to do to get all these carriage pieces together is we're going to insert, there we go, we're going to insert all the parts. So we got the carriage and 2 batteries, the LED, and the metal connector. Now, I gotta hit check mark. If I don't hit check mark, then they don't stay. First things first, this LED that I created has multiple parts to it. It's not just one part. And so if I try to move it, which I'm gonna do right now, it separates off from the prongs. That's not good. All right, so I'm going to undo that first of all. And then I need to group this. All right, so you can do this with any set of objects that come in together. You can create them as a group. What it does when you create this group, it means those parts are going to stay in the same orientation to each other until you ungroup them or until you're done with the assembly. So I want all of those together the way they are. I'm going to hit check mark, and now my LED stays as one piece. All right. If I did that with all of the pieces, then all of the pieces would stay in that orientation they're in right now the rest of the time. Like I wouldn't be able to move them. All right. So I only want to group things that make sense. Okay. Hardest part first or easiest part first? Hard part? All right, the hard part first. That's the LED. Okay. So the LED basically works like this. If you look at those flashlights when you pull them apart, the smaller prong of the LED fits along this top surface of the carriage. The longer prong is along this lower surface of the carriage, and then the bent part of the lower prong goes in this channel right here so that it touches the battery. All right, so that's kind of what's going on. So in order for this to work correctly, especially since that LED is rotated a little bit, it's not like perfectly lined up so that these two are parallel with the top surface, I'm going to use a tangent constraint. So we haven't really done this before in this class. The tangent constraint is this one right here. It's a circle tangent to another part, and then it shows that you can move the circle around that piece. All right. So I'm going to click on that. And the first tangent I'm going to set up is that, and this is only by trial and error, okay? You're learning from my experience. So this edge right here is going to basically be limited by and ride alongside this interior wall right here of the carriage. So I'm going to click that as well. So I clicked the edge and I clicked that, and now those two are oriented tangent to each other. Now right now it's like, oh, that doesn't really look like anything happened. And you're kind of right, because when I do tangent, it's not like that is locked into this surface that's right here. It's locked into the plane that makes up that surface. So it can go anywhere on that whole plane. I can move that edge. All right, so if I were to literally grab this edge right here and move it places, it's moving all over the place, but it's staying tangent to that plane that that part was on. Now, the other thing I forgot to do that's going to be really important is I'm going to fix this carriage in space. So I'm going to right-click and click Fix. That way the carriage doesn't move, and so I don't have the carriage moving every time I try to move something else. Okay, so that was my first tangent. Doesn't look like it did a whole lot. My next one is going to be, again, this is going to be rotated a little bit. So this edge, this bottom edge right there, is going to rest on the top edge up here. So I'm going to do that tangent. So tangent constraint. This bottom inside edge of that LED prong is going to rest on the top surface of that. And once again, it's just making sure it's attached to the plane. So far it's doing what it's supposed to do. Now if I try to move this, now you see there's a rotation that starts to happen. All right, so that part's trying to stay tangent to those two things at the same time. So it doesn't have it has a little bit more limited movement basically. All right, so then the third constraint is another tangent. And this tangent is my outside bottom surface of this longer bent prong. So that edge right there needs to rest on this bottom edge down here. I'll hit check mark. And now what you'll notice is that at this point, the only way this can go is forward and back. I can't really move it to the right or to the left. I'm trying to, but it's not. All right, that's because it's lined up on all those surfaces. So that's great. The last thing I need to do then is I need to make sure that this back end aligns with the front end of my carriage. And so to do that, I'm going to do a planar mate. And so I want the back plane of the LED to line up with the front plane of the carriage. Now when I first do it, it's going to drop it down there like I didn't have any tangent constraints before, which I totally did. See, they're all not really operating. But as soon as I hit the check mark, then it'll recognize, okay, yeah, you had all those other constraints too. So now they're all in there. That's the LED. Like I said, that was the most difficult one. That took a lot of me trying to figure things out. What I will also say for that LED is that it's likely that I would have to adjust some of the dimensions on that LED in order for it to not interfere or accidentally like dip into the carriage. So right now it's kind of dipping into the carriage a little bit, and I'll show you how you can tell that a little bit more easily another time. Well, not another time, later during this. But for now, that looks really good. Okay, so if I looked at that from this point of view, I'd say awesome job. And that's going to be good enough for what we're doing this time, you know, for our project. But because I need to make sure things are really good, I worked on making them really good and making sure there is no interference. All right, so batteries. The batteries, if you pay attention to them, the smaller part is, so this part right here is towards the front, and then the larger part is towards the back of the carriage. So the first thing I'm actually going to do with these is I'm going to click on them and I'm going to reorient them so that they're set up that direction. That way when I go to move them, it's not as brutal when it's trying to set my constraints. So I move those, we're good. All right, so for the batteries, what we're going to do is we're going to line up this first one. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that it's all the way against this back panel. Not this one, because that's where the connector goes, but this one. So I'm going to do a planar mate on that. So planar mate, I'm going to click on this, and then I'm going to click on this. Now the reason I'm not doing fastened mate is because a fastened mate makes the connectors perfectly aligned with each other. And I don't want that to be true. I want this to be able to line up with the bottom of my carriage. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is to make it a planar mate right now, which means it can go anywhere against that plane, even through the object. And then we're going to use the tangent again. So I'm going to go to the tangent mate, and I'm going to click on the part of my surface that's cylindrical, which is this part right here. I'm going to click on that surface, and then inside the carriage, I'm going to click on, I want to make sure I'm clicking on this bottom surface right here. Click on that. So now, when I made those two tangent, it won't move off of this plane, and it also needs to stay tangent to that bottom surface. So, well, I say the bottom surface, but it's the whole curved surface right here. So it has a little bit of wiggle room, but it's not really going anywhere. All right. And then I'm going to do a similar thing with this battery. So for the other battery, I'm going to do a planar mate on, let me make sure. Yep. So that surface attached to the negative part of the other battery. Hit check mark on that. And then also make sure that I have a tangent constraint on that battery and the inside surface. So now those two have, again, have a little bit of wiggle room, but that's about it. They're staying there. If I look closely at my connector of the LED, it looks like it's touching that battery. That's kind of good. All right. Now some of that was I edited my battery to fit there. All right, so actually, or my LED, so I actually had to work a little bit to that. All right, last one, this piece right here, metal connector. I'm going to rotate it so that it's oriented kind of the right way, like that. And then sorry, I'm just going to do this. All right, and so then the last part here, I want this to basically do what it does in real life. I want it to slide in that slot and be able to slide out of that slot. So I'm actually going to do a slider mate on this metal connector. So the slider mate is this one. And I am going to select the very bottom of this metal connector right there. And then I'm going to select, this is going to be the harder part, the bottom of that right there. So the bottom of that hole, make sure it's down there. Okay, so I'll hit the check mark. Now, what you'll notice is that metal connector is going through the battery. Not quite possible in real life. Well, we can easily, because we used a slider mate, right now, this thing can go up and down, right? It can go all the way through the whole thing. Well, because of that slider mate, I can actually edit the slider mate that I made, and I could set some limits. All right, so this is my z-axis down here. I know it's kind of hard to see, but that z-axis, it's positive towards the z, and it's negative this direction. So actually, I want my maximum to be a negative number, like 0.045, for instance. All right, and that's the lowest it's going to go. Well, technically the highest because of the way that everything's set up, but that's the lowest it's going to push into the carriage. And then if I want to make this like negative 0.2, for instance, that'll set some limits. And check this out. So now that's the furthest I let it go. Okay. Now this will cause some issues when we go to put it in the case potentially. It depends on if we continue to make the assembly in here or if we make this a subassembly. If you make this a subassembly and you bring this whole thing into your main assembly, what it'll do is it'll keep everything exactly like that. So all that stuff's going to be locked together the way it is, which is probably how you want it. All right. But if you make the rest of the assembly in the same spot, then this will move basically. And so we just have to be cognizant that that will move and pay attention to whether what we need to do in the case. But that's pretty much the whole carriage. All right. So now, where's my, oh, did my video stop?